Welcome to this video from the Consultants Development Institute. I'm Carter McNamara, an instructor with the Institute and the presenter in this video. By now, you and your client have gone through the engagement, discovery, action planning, and implementation phases of the collaborative consulting cycle. And now you and your client are ready to evaluate the results of the project to determine if the project was successful. So in this video, we'll review the overall goals of this evaluation phase. We'll look at various barriers to evaluation and yet the many benefits that can come from doing a systematic evaluation. We'll suggest an approach to accomplish a very useful project evaluation, including questions to get answered during the evaluation. We'll give guidelines to design a relevant and realistic overall evaluation plan, and we'll explore possible responses to the various different results that might occur from your evaluation. This video focuses on highlights about evaluating consulting projects. However, the texts for CDI's organizational consulting programs give more specific guidelines about doing those evaluations. The first goal of the evaluation phase is to determine, was the project successful? You'll remember from the earlier course, Standards, Principles, and Risks in Consulting, that there are numerous ways to define success for a project. For example, success might primarily mean that the particular outcomes specified in the consulting contract were achieved, or only that the client's problem was solved, or that the project did not take longer than expected and did not cost more than expected. We learned in the course Roles, Goals, and Reasons in Consulting that professional consultants should always ensure that their clients have adopted the necessary practices to implement the changes as needed. So this phase should evaluate the extent of those changes and practices. We also learned from that course that a professional consultant should ensure that their clients have learned to solve similar problems well into the future. So this evaluation phase should assess the extent of your client's learning from the project. If success was not achieved in your project and your client did not adopt the necessary changes, then you and your client should consider whether to cycle back to an earlier phase in the consulting cycle. This evaluation phase should assess that situation as well. If you and your client agree that the project was successful, then you and your client might decide to proceed on to the next phase, the termination phase. You'll know that by the end of this phase as well. In this phase, you might encounter some of the following barriers. So before we share guidelines about successfully evaluating the project, let's review some of those potential barriers now. The first barrier, arguably, is a good one, and that is your client might be so satisfied with the results of the project that they don't feel the need for a final evaluation. In that case, remind your client of the many benefits of evaluation, and we'll mention them in the next slide. Another barrier is when the project activities reveal yet another major problem in your client's organization. Ironically, this might be a sign of project success because the project did what it was supposed to do. It addressed the original problem. Yet, your client might be so focused on the new problem that he isn't at all interested in doing any form of evaluation about the old problem. In this situation, you still might want some formal acknowledgement that the original problem was solved and that the original outcomes in your contract were achieved. Another barrier is burnout, especially if the consulting project was a long and tedious one. The idea of starting yet another phase of consulting might not be appealing to your client now at all. If so, then it's useful to ensure your client that the evaluation will be very focused and practical. Remind them that the evaluation can be very useful in ensuring that their problems won't simply reappear again soon after you're gone. Another barrier is when key people leave the organization, including the person who is your current client throughout the project. If that's the case, then perhaps you can suggest how the organization can promptly select another primary contact for you. But that decision should ultimately be up to those in the organization. Hopefully, some members of your client's project team could become your next current client. Yet another barrier to evaluation is if the quality of the relationship between you and your client degenerates. Ironically, if the relationship has degenerated, then the client might still be very interested in evaluation, but primarily in evaluating you. The last barrier is if implementation of the plans has completely stalled. In that situation, it will be extremely difficult to get the client to even consider an evaluation for now. Instead, you might encourage your client to cycle back to the discovery phase of consulting to re-examine the real causes of the problems in their organization and why the implementation is stalled for now. In some situations, you might want to look at the termination date on your contract with your client and decide how much longer you want to continue to work in that project. We mentioned in the previous slide that it's very useful to keep reminding your client of the benefits of evaluation. So let's quickly list those for now. The benefits of evaluation in the project include that it improves the performance of the organization and the people in it, because it brings attention to desired results and the status toward achieving them. Evaluation makes people more realistic in their expectations, which is a big benefit when everyone nowadays is expected to do more with less. It increases communications among everyone involved when they're sharing their results and their learning. It also increases credibility with stakeholders when they realize that you're using evaluations to make yourself and others even more accountable. But the most important benefit of evaluation is the new learning when people share their questions, answers, and insights during the evaluation. Now, let's talk about the recommended approach to doing a project evaluation. First, it's important that you and your client work collaboratively to conduct this final project evaluation. Your client has more direct access to needed information in the organization and has more influence to get others to open up to you to share that information as well. Members of your client's project team can provide additional perspectives, time, and energy to complete the evaluation. And because you work collaboratively, your client is much more likely to understand and accept the results of the evaluation and to learn from them. During the discovery phase of consulting, you learn that one of the most important activities in a research effort is to focus it by establishing specific research questions. This time, we'll refer to those questions as evaluation questions, but they'll have the same purpose, to focus the evaluations. Similar to the design of the research during the discovery phase, you and your client should take a careful, systematic approach to this evaluation. First, clarify the evaluation questions and then design the evaluation to answer those questions. The design should specify what information you will need, how best to get it, who will get it, and by when. During the implementation phase of consulting, you and your client conducted evaluations of the activities during the project. One of the most powerful ways to engage your client in an evaluation of the final results now is to build that final evaluation on the evaluations that you were already doing during the project. That way, your client doesn't see this final evaluation as an entirely new set of activities. Instead, this final evaluation is almost a continuation of what you've already been doing. Let's look at some possible evaluation questions to use in the final project evaluation. The first question to consider during this evaluation is, was the problem solved? Rather than merely asking a question that can be answered with a simple yes or no, it's best to ask, for example, to what extent was the problem solved? That type of question makes people really think and learn. Successful change means adopting changes into the structures, strategies, and roles of the organization. So next, ask, what new organizational practices has the project implemented? That question helps to determine whether the client has actually adopted the new systems and practices needed to ensure that the problem will be solved for the long term. You'll remember from the course Roles, Goals, and Reasons in Consulting that one of the primary goals of a consultant is to ensure that their clients can solve similar problems in the future. So ask your client, how might they solve the same types of problems in the future? That question helps you learn more about the client's ability to solve those problems if they do occur. The next question to ask is about the quality of the collaborative relationship between you and your client. The answer to that question helps you and your client to be even more effective at solving complex problems, whether you work together or apart. A question about new learning is very timely now. You and your client have been reflecting on the quality of what you've been doing, and you've hopefully been gathering new knowledge, skills, and abilities. So now is a good time to pull that new learning together with the question about learning. The next question is sometimes forgotten, and that's to ask about any results that occurred but were unexpected. Unless we ask about them, they tend not to be noticed. It's not unusual that projects produce results other than solving the primary problem in the project. Perhaps it's useful now too to begin thinking about next steps in the project. So you might ask, what should be our next steps? The next phase, project termination, will firm up those next steps, but it's useful to think about them now. Now that you've clarified the questions for this evaluation to answer, you're ready to finish designing your evaluation plan. So in your plan, first list the evaluation questions that you and your client agreed on. Next, list what information is needed to answer each question. And then specify how best to get that information. Think about the various tools you use during the discovery phase, such as documentation, questionnaires, and interviews. And next, decide who will use those tools to get the necessary information. Similar to the discovery phase, this might be one of the few times that you don't work collaboratively with clients, because many employees still might not be as open and honest with their managers as they would be with you. Next, based on the availability of the employees in your client's organization, consider the best timing to get that information. You probably have a good sense for this too from having done the research during the discovery phase. And next, think carefully about whom to report your findings and conclusions to. Will it be to the board of directors, an investor or funder, any other internal and external stakeholders? Also think about what will you include in the evaluation report itself. Different audiences might be interested in different information, so you might generate different reports. For example, the board of directors might want to know if the problem was solved, how much was spent, and what strategic practices should be changed. Employees might want to know what changes will occur and how those employees will be affected by those changes. Let's look now at the responses that you might make to the final evaluation plan. Once you've conducted the evaluation, there's a variety of options that are facing you, options that you can make decisions about. If your client, including the members of their project team, agrees that the original problem was solved, then it's still very important to recognize whether their organization has adopted the necessary new practices that would solve their similar problems well into the future. If the problem was solved and new practices are in place, then you're ready for the next and final phase, project termination. However, if the problem was not solved, then you might decide to cycle back briefly to the discovery phase to determine if the selected problem was really the most important problem to address, or was it indeed just a symptom? Or you might cycle back to the action planning phase in case the discovery's recommendations weren't sufficiently well planned. And perhaps the implementation phase is needed to ensure that the necessary actions were indeed implemented during that phase. Based on the results of the evaluation, what did you learn about the quality of your collaborative working relationship? The success of that relationship will benefit you and your client well into the future, whether you continue to work together or each of you works apart? How might you improve how you work collaboratively with each other or with other people? Based on the results of the evaluation, what new learning did you get? Think of new knowledge, skills, and abilities. Hopefully you've been documenting those during the project. How can you use those in your life and work? And what next steps were suggested during the evaluation? Those ideas will be useful during the next phase, project termination. Let's pause now to capture the learning from what you've heard so far in this video. And in your learning journal for this program, go to the section entitled Reflections from the Readings and Videos and consider the following 2 questions. They're intended to customize the contents of the video to you and your clients. You might discuss the questions with your peers. The questions are, what might be the most challenging aspect during the evaluation phase with the types of clients that you work with or want to work with? And next, how might you overcome those challenges with your clients? You can pause the video by clicking on the pause button at the bottom left corner of this video. It's the button with the 2 bars in it. After you've addressed the questions in your journal, then click on the button again to resume the video. And thank you for viewing this video from CDI. If you ever have any questions or want any feedback, any materials from us, simply send us an email to info@consultantsdevelopmentinstitute.org.